Okay, so we're just going to briefly explain the phi phenomenon. This is another Gestalt principle. So it's the discovery of Max Wertheimer. And what he discovered was that an illusion of movement is created when two or more adjacent lights blink on and off in succession. So if you look here, you'll notice you have this like red light blinking on and off, or this red color kind of going on and off there. But because they're in close proximity and they're blinking off in succession, it will appear to you as though they're moving back and forth, like it's getting passed back and forth. But if you pay attention to this middle zone here, there's never any color in that zone. There is no passing through that area. This is the same type of principle that like movies were made out of. So you'd have like a series of still images that you run them together, much like a flip book. Your brain will fill in and perceive all kinds of stuff that's not there. It'll connect those two things because it makes everything make sense. It makes it simplistic and ordinary. Things don't disappear from us and then end up somewhere else, but they could move from one spot to the other. So it's easier for our minds to interpret the movement than it is just disappearing and showing up elsewhere. Christmas lights, when you see them on people's houses like this, they appear to be moving. Again, it's not. The lights are just, each light is just blinking on and off. So if you look at this like blue light right here, it's going on and off at set intervals. But because it's staggered and with the adjacent ones, they're all kind of moving in a different order there, like right next to each other, one after the other, you get the sense that the lights are moving, and they are not. This one's interesting because there's a few things going on here, because you'll see how the phi phenomenon is going to work with after images. So if you stare at this black cross right there in the center, you will notice that it probably looks to you like there's movement with these pink circles, right? These pink dots. But really it's just at each spot, it's the circle's disappearing. There's no stimulus there at all. There's nothing. But as you're staring at it, it looks not only that it's moving, but it will start to appear, if you're staring center, that that dot has a color, like a greenish color. And what you're getting is the after image. So your brain is going to tire of firing in the one color, and it's going to go to its opponent color. Remember, red and green are opponent colors. So the pink is going to come across kind of greenish on the other side of that. But if you keep staring at that cross in the center, not only will that empty space look green and you'll still perceive movement, eventually the whole thing will just blur out and disappear as your eyes get completely tired. And then you blink and it'll come back. I don't know about you guys right now, but I am getting a lot of green circular movement after images here. All right, now here you have these, like they look like almost like cylinder-esque things moving up and down. But they're moving up and down, but they also appear to be rotating. They appear to be spinning. And because of the direction in which they're spinning and the fact that they're moving up and down, you'll get the sense that they are moving this way. They're moving up and towards the right part of the page. But if you'll notice here, if I just put a pen right here, you'll notice that they're not actually getting any closer to the right portion of the page at all. It's just going up and down and spinning. But you have a basic understanding about what things do when they move, and so you'll see it as moving towards the right when it is not. Again, here's another situation where the lights are flickering on and off next to each other. This one ends up looking more like a seesaw, I guess. So it'll make me dizzy after a while. And lastly, I'm going to combine something Wertheimer did with something that's more modern, but the same basic principles. You'll notice that she is moving here, but there's a little bit of a miss now with the direction in which she is moving. What's problematic here is that there's no light source on the form at all. And as there's no light source, there's really actually no way to tell if she's moving clockwise or counterclockwise. Now, I know for me, currently she's moving clockwise. That's probably not going to be true for all of you. And if you stare at her long enough, she'll often switch directions. I found that if you like kind of focus in on the feet where that shadow is coming in, like it might be a little bit easier if I pull back there, like, but if you stare at the feet a little bit, she will change direction. It can take a while. But here's the deal here is if you focus on the arms, particularly like one of them, say like the arm that she has bent, it's going from one side to the other side. And the phi phenomenon is kicking in there. She's not actually going across that entire space you think she's going across. She's going across part of it. And your brain's filling in the gaps for the rest. There's an absence of light here too, which means that she can be going in either direction. And so the fun is to kind of stare at this picture long enough and see if you can change the direction in which she is moving. There are times, perceptually speaking, when we are going to view things as moving when they're not as well. So in addition to the phi phenomenon, if you look at these circles here, if you stare at that dot right there in the center, the dot right here, and you move your face towards the dot, the circles will appear to move in opposite directions. As you pull your face back, it'll appear to, again, change direction. So when you move forward, the inner circle should go to the left, and as you move back, the inner circle should go to the right. And if you just keep moving your head back and forth, you'll find that the direction that they move in will appear to change, but nothing on this page is actually changing. And we can sometimes feel almost like a dizzy movement when we have a situation like this where we have perfect little squares, actually. But what's inside is not perfect. It's twisted at an angle. So this space is all constant, but this space is, again, it's like a cut on an angle, and they're different angles. And so this can sometimes also appear to be moving kind of in a dizzy, uncomfortable way. But nothing here on the page is actually moving. So perceptual constancy is this tendency for us to perceive our environment as remaining the same, despite the fact that there's been change in our sensory input. So what we actually see, the image projected on our retina changes, but we don't experience any change. It's a complete perceptual override of what is actually in our environment. Size constancy is pretty much learned through experience. The perceived size of something remains the same, even though the size of the retinal image changes. So if I am in the same room with you, and as I walk towards you, you don't think of me as getting bigger and then smaller as I walk away from you. You know approximately what size I am, and you just experience me as being closer or further away. You take this for granted and think, all right, no big deal. Like, we know, like, my car is, not the size of an ant when I'm looking at it from an office window. But if you grew up in an environment where you weren't able to see in great distances, then you would not have that perceptual size constancy. So if you grew up in a dense area with a lot of brush where you couldn't see long distances, something like that would be very confusing to you. There was a man actually that had grown up in an environment like that, and he was brought out into an open field area. And in the distance of the field, there were these animals, and somebody asked him, like, what do you see? And the guy said, oh, I see a bunch of ants. And they started moving in the direction of where they were standing, and they were buffalo. So to this guy, these things were getting bigger as they approached him, and he accused the guy of some sort of witchcraft and ran back into the jungle area. And that's a question of perception. Like, he's learned that he can't see in great distance, so things rarely change in size. Where you and I have grown up in varied environments, we can see distance. There's nothing obscuring us all the time. So if we were to grow up in one room, we would have a very warped sense of size constancy. Things would appear to actually be a different size. So again, here you see, the guy is supposed to be about the same size, and you get that. So when he's standing back here versus here, you just know over here you're closer to me, over here you're further away. Same thing will happen with shape. You look at something and you know what shape it is, and when you see it at another angle, you don't actually think it's a different shape. So an obvious example would be a door. So if you look at this door here, you can see, yeah, all right, that's a rectangle. And as the door opens, you'll see that it is no longer a rectangle. And that changes more drastically the further you open the door. But you don't actually experience a change in the shape. You experience a change in how open the door is. But the image that your retina is getting, your sensory information, is that there is a change, but perception will override it. Some science centers have an example of an Ames illusion. I know the Rochester Museum of Play, the Strong Museum, has one of these. I've seen them in a few different places. But basically, when you're standing on the outside, you peer in, and you're supposed to see a very normal room. But it's meant to look like a normal room, but not. And what'll happen is, as you start on one side over here and walk towards the other side, you will appear to get bigger. If you're standing on this side and you walk in the other direction, you will appear to get smaller. And this is a problem really with competing constancies. So people don't change in size from day to day all that much, right? But rooms rarely ever, if ever, change in their size. So when you're like, okay, so the size of the person, it's not likely to change, but the room is definitely not going to change. So when those two things, you have two competing messages, it will appear as the person is changing instead of the room, because rooms are less likely to change. There's an override there. So, maybe I'll post a little video of, I had my kids doing this once at a place, and you'll see they appear to get bigger. The whole room is decorated so that it looks like a normal room from the outside. So here you'd see what you're actually looking at. You have somebody peering in. The back wall, which appears to go straight, like is actually coming in at an angle. The floor, which appears to be level, is not. It goes up at an angle. And the ceiling, which is also decorated to make it look like it's level, is not. It's sloping downward. Now here you have another issue with shape constancy. So you see the doors, which I've explained, how this is the shape you're actually seeing here, although you will perceive it as a rectangle. Here on this side, you have a series of flat shapes. Actually, these are all flat shapes. And you think that they're little squares, but they're not. They're only a select few of them in the center-ish area are squares. And as you move outward, they're not. And what will happen is they suggest the changing the shape of the flat surface will suggest a spherical shape. And so you will see these as squares filling up a sphere. Color constancy and brightness constancy are another type of constancy. Remember, this is all the Gestalt world of us and our need to simplify what we see, to make it so that things are constant instead of changing. It's just easier for us to manage. So if I am wearing a green sweater, that sweater, I know that it's green, and if the light is off, I will still look down and see a green sweater. The light goes on, I still see a green sweater. I won't experience any change in the color of the sweater at all. But technically, the sweater did change color because color depends upon the amount of light that is reflected or absorbed. And so if you change the light source, you've changed the color. But I, knowing what color it's supposed to be, will not experience a change in that color at all. If I don't know what the color is, I would have a hard time identifying a color. So if I said, okay, go outside and put this in my car, and let's say I'm driving a red Toyota, and you go outside and it's dark out, you'd have trouble identifying which one is a red Toyota. Any color that's blue, gray, black, red, whatever, they're all going to look like they could potentially be the red Toyotas. They're all the same type of car. And with the brightness contrast of something, so this is another visual phenomenon where there's an increase in the amount of apparent darkness of a stimulus when observed right next to something that's lighter. So this gray here looks less bright than it does over here because it's standing by contrast with what it's next to. Another example of brightness being dependent upon what something is next to, this white inside here is the same shade as the white outside there, but because of what it's next to, this white appears to be substantially brighter than the white that's out here. So this image gives you a good example of how something can change in the appearance of its color based on what it is next to. Now what's interesting with this optical illusion is depending on the angle and how far away you are from these circles, they probably look like they are different colors to you. Some might look, red, pink, yellow, just different colors, but they're actually all the same color circle. It's just that they are up against different colors, and so it changes what you perceive. This is actually known as the Munkar illusion. And what you do is what he did was he took the same colored shape, so in this particular case it's a circle, and you alternate what colors you see right next to the circle. And you'll notice, if you remember about after images, that you have some competing colors. You have the blue and the yellow, and you have the red and the green. And so you vary which ones you're seeing of the competing opponent processes there. And it will make the circles appear to be different colors, but the circles are actually completely constant. It's what it's up against that changes. And you might want to take a step back from your computer screen and look and see if it changes any, or like stand up and look down at an angle towards it, because it does appear to the contrast appears to be more striking as you change your angle and distance. Okay, so this is an example of constancies working together, and what'll happen to you sort of from a perceptual point of view. You'll notice what you're looking at here is this sort of checkered board pattern, right? So you're light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and it seems to be like a constant pattern. And you'll notice that it's not. You've got this shadowing here, but this cylinder explains that, right? So if you look at this cylinder, it's darker on the left, it's lighter on the right, which would indicate that there's a light source over here from the top right. Therefore, this is in shadow, and it's casting a shadow over this part of the board, which is why the board then looks like it is alternating light, dark, light, dark. So therefore, it looks like A is on one of the darker squares and B is on one of the lighter squares. But in actuality, A and B are the same color. So if I take a screenshot of A, there you have it, A, no surprise, right? And I take a screenshot of B, look, A and B are the same color, yet on the board they do not appear to be the same color. So watch, if I do this, I'll just make B a bit smaller. And as I've done this in front of classes before and have been accused of witchcraft, which I promise it is not. I even had one kid one year yell out, "Not today, Satan," which I thought was also kind of funny. Like, this is a perceptual issue. It's not something that I'm doing. There's no magic here. There's no witchcraft. But if you look, it might surprise you. Watch, look, I put that on, put B right there on A, and you're like, all right, good, same color. Maybe there's some trick there, but watch this. As I take B and move it down, it appears to get lighter as it lands on B. And I am not changing the color of this. It changes the color regardless of wherever I put it on the board. It appears to be a different color in relation to what it's next to. Now the issue here is that for us, the amount of light reflecting on a source, it affects how we perceive light, right? So if we know that this is a green cylinder, in light conditions and dark conditions, we will experience this as being green. If we don't know it's a green cylinder, then we have, we could experience all kinds of different things there. But so long as we know it's green, we're used to the amount of light reflecting or being absorbed, changing, and yet the color of the object not changing. But we're not used to seeing a pattern fixed like this and knowing what shadowing does and seeing that change. So when two constancies compete with each other, the one that's least likely to change is going to be perceived as remaining constant, and the other one will appear to change in front of your eyes, which is why B appears dark here and light there. And moving on to depth perception, which is the ability to perceive 3D space and accurately judge distance. It's primarily learned, and it is primarily the work of our eyes, although we have monocular depth cues and binocular depth cues. So depth cues that come from one eye and depth cues that come from the use of both eyes. And although I said that depth perception is primarily learned, there's an interesting study here. It was done by Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk at Cornell University. And what they did was essentially they had this glass table here, right? For this visual cliff, and they have what appears to be a shallow side, so this checkerboard pattern here on the shallow side, and then it drops down this steep drop off onto the floor, but the tabletop is secure. It's like a glass table there. So there's an apparent drop off, but no actual drop off. And the mom will stand at one side over here and coax the child to crawl over to her. And the child will crawl very comfortably across the shallow side and then hesitate or even stop sometimes as soon as it appears to drop off to the steeper side. What this test, this visual cliff test, does is show us that there is an inborn quality to depth perception as well. Not that it's only learned. Because a baby, all right, so you might think, all right, by the time you've learned to crawl, you maybe will have experienced some depth perception based on experience, and that makes sense. But babies that can't crawl also show a difference. So if you put a baby here on this side, so that they're on their bellies so that they can look down, they're fine. And if you measure like what happens to their heartbeats when you move them over here, there is a change in what they're experiencing. So even as early as 2 to 3 months, they are experiencing depth. Now, as the name suggests, binocular cues are going to be visual input from two eyes that helps us to perceive depth or distance. And this is going to be based on retinal disparity. So because our eyes are about 2.5 inches apart, each retina receives slightly different information of the world. And you've probably experienced this when if you were to just look ahead at something in your room right now. So just look ahead and stare at something straight on, and then close your left eye, then close your right eye, and go back and forth, closing the left and the right, then the left and the right. And what you're looking at appears to move. And that's where you can see, okay, so each eye is getting different information. When my brain puts those two different pieces of information together, I get an idea of what I'm looking at in terms of depth. This retinal disparity can also be seen in that little floating finger trick. If you were to take your pointer fingers and hold them, a few inches from your face, not too close to your face, and kind of move them like towards each other but not touching, all of a sudden you get this like extra little finger in here, this little like, it looks like almost like a floating sausage, floating portion of your finger, and that has everything to do with retinal disparity. Another binocular depth cue is convergence. And so what you'll notice if you were to take a family member right now and have them stare at a pencil. And as you just tell them, stare at this pencil or the finger or whatever it is, just stare at it and move it, pretty far away from their face. And as you move it closer, you'll watch that their eyes will start to point inward. Their eyes will almost do what we call cross, right? And that's how we can tell that something is closer away. Our eyes are converging on it. If something is further away, it's not doing that, as seen here. So in the back here, the eyes would look straight ahead at the stimulus. As you move this needle closer to the eyes will appear to converge inward or cross. Now, even if you were to only have one eye, you would still have monocular depth cues. So with one or two eyes, you're going to get depth input. So monocular depth cues are cues that are coming from a single eye. So we can see a number of monocular depth cues just by looking at this picture of the Taj Mahal. So first up, linear perspective. You'll notice that these lines that are parallel appear to converge in the distance. They appear to come together. And that's how you know that something is getting further away. Another monocular depth cue is interposition. Let me make sure I'm marking that for you. So interposition. So this is where you see that like this tree, for example, this bush here, I guess, is closer to us than those people. And we can tell that it's closer because it obscures part of the picture that we're seeing. Here you see that the tree is blocking part of the minaret, and that's how we know that the tree is closer to us than the minaret. That's interposition. Another monocular depth cue would be relative size. So I mark that there. And one thing you can tell is like, okay, so these people over here are closer to us than these people over there, and you can tell because these people appear to be bigger than those people over there. Okay, another monocular depth cue would be texture gradient. And for this, you'll notice that the walkway would seem richer in detail than the minarets. And the minarets, the ones up close, would seem richer in detail than the building itself. And that would be an example of texture gradient. With aerial perspective, far away objects look fuzzy and blurred compared to objects that are closer to you. You have light and shadow depth cues as well. So brighter objects are going to appear to be closer to us, and dimmer objects appear to be further away. And there are really two other monocular cues, but that image won't show these as well. So accommodation, which we went over in another slide, remember the change in the shape of your lens to adjust for the incoming light. That's going to focus it on the back of your retina. That's one that'll give you a monocular depth cue. Remember, I told you that something that is close up will cause your lens to curve and thicken, and something that's further away will cause your lens to flatten and thin. So that's another depth cue that we're getting. And the motion parallax, this relative motion. So when an object is moving, objects at varying distances move at different speeds and actually in different directions across the retina. This would be an example of a motion parallax or relative motion. So as you're sitting in a train, you fix your eyes on a point. As you say, you fix your eyes like right here, and you'll notice that the things that are closer to you will appear to be moving extremely rapidly. Things a little further away move a little slower. And the things furthest away of all sometimes can even seem to follow you. A really obvious example would be like the moon. The moon will seem to follow you for your entire journey because of how far away it is.